Ambition does not always begin as hunger for success. Sometimes it begins as a private agreement that stillness is unsafe. A person learns that motion gives them shape, output gives them proof, and achievement gives them a place to stand when their inner world feels uncertain. They may call it purpose, discipline, drive, or devotion, and all of those words may contain truth. But beneath them, there can also be a quieter pressure saying, if I stop moving, I may have to feel what movement has been helping me outrun. The ambition voice often sounds noble because it knows how to speak in the language of growth. It says build, expand, improve, commit, produce, keep going. It reminds you that life is short, that gifts must be used, that time cannot be wasted, and because those statements are not false, they can become difficult to question. The problem is not ambition itself. The problem begins when ambition becomes the only voice allowed to define what a meaningful life is. The peace voice speaks differently. It does not usually arrive with strategy, urgency, or a long list of reasons. It often appears as a quiet fatigue, a longing for silence, a desire to be without performing, or a simple wish to stop measuring the day by what it produced. Because it is quieter, people mistake it for laziness. Because it does not always explain itself, people assume it has no intelligence. But peace is not the absence of direction. Sometimes peace is the part of you that remembers direction means very little if the self carrying it has become exhausted. This is the first place the inner conflict becomes visible. One voice says, you are here to build. Another voice says, you are here to breathe. One voice sees rest as delay. Another voice sees constant output as disappearance. The person caught between them often feels guilty no matter which one they obey, because ambition makes peace feel like failure, and peace makes ambition feel like self-abandonment. That guilt is not proof that either side is wrong. It is proof that the inner system has not yet learned how to let movement and stillness belong to the same life. The mechanism is easier to understand when you look at what productivity does emotionally. Productivity can regulate anxiety because it gives the mind something to hold. It turns uncertainty into tasks, pain into projects, and inner pressure into visible progress. For a while, this can be useful, even healing, because action can restore dignity after seasons of helplessness. But when productivity becomes the main way a person feels safe, stillness stops feeling restorative and starts feeling like exposure. That exposure is often the real issue. When nothing is being built, posted, planned, fixed, improved, or pursued, the self becomes harder to defend through evidence. There is no result to point toward. There is no proof that you are becoming better. There is no outer motion to distract from inner silence. This is why peace can feel threatening to a driven person. It removes the scoreboard, and without the scoreboard, they may not know how to feel valuable. You may notice this pattern in the way rest gets postponed, even when the body clearly asks for it. The person says they will slow down after this project, after this milestone, after this season, after they get ahead. But the finish line keeps moving because the ambition voice does not actually want a finish line. It wants a reason to keep the self organized around forward motion. Once one task ends, another appears. Not always because life demands it, but because stillness begins pressing against the room. This does not mean the ambition voice is false. It may carry real purpose, real responsibility, real creative fire. Some people genuinely are built to create, lead, teach, serve, construct, and move ideas into form. The mistake is not in honoring that current. The mistake is letting the current become proof that rest is a betrayal of the mission. When ambition forgets the body, It stops being devotion and starts becoming extraction. The peace voice does not come to destroy ambition, it comes to return proportion. It asks whether the life being built still includes the one building it. It asks whether the mission has become a place to hide from ordinary human needs. It asks whether expansion is still alive or whether it has become compulsion wearing the clothing of purpose. These are uncomfortable questions because they do not attack productivity directly. They reveal the emotional agreement underneath it. Many people resist the peace voice because they associate peace with losing momentum. They imagine that if they slow down, everything will fall apart. The work will lose force, the audience will vanish, the opportunity will close, or the inner fire will fade. That fear is understandable, especially for people who had to fight hard for every inch of movement. But peace is not always the opposite of momentum. Sometimes peace is what prevents momentum from becoming self consumption. There is a difference between rest that restores and rest that avoids. The ambition voice often blurs that difference because it has seen avoidance disguise itself as rest before. It knows how easily people can drift, postpone, and soften into excuses, so it becomes suspicious of all stillness. But discernment has to become sharper than suspicion. Some rest weakens commitment because it is escape. Other rest deepens commitment because it returns the person to themselves. This is where the internal dialogue must become more honest. The ambition voice needs to be asked what it is truly afraid will happen if the pace slows. The peace voice needs to be asked whether it wants restoration or disappearance. Neither voice should be allowed to speak in slogans. Ambition cannot simply say mission, and peace cannot simply say balance. Each must reveal its deeper function because words like mission and balance can both become hiding places when they are not examined. When ambition is healthy, it gives shape to energy. It helps desire become action, vision become practice, and insight become contribution. It does not need to punish the body to prove devotion. It does not need to turn every hour into evidence. Healthy ambition respects timing because it understands that a burned out instrument cannot carry a clear signal for long. It builds without treating the builder as disposable. When peace is healthy, it gives depth to life. It lets the nervous system settle enough to hear what constant movement drowns out. It restores sensitivity, presence, gratitude, and the quiet intelligence that cannot be rushed into speaking. Healthy peace is not numbness. It is not collapse. It is the condition where a person can exist without immediately converting existence into a task. This distinction changes how you evaluate your own rhythm. Instead of asking whether you are doing enough, you begin asking what you're doing is doing to you. Is your output making you more awake or more absent? Is your discipline creating clarity or only postponing contact with yourself? Is your rest returning you to life or quietly removing you from it? The better question is rarely how much should I do? The better question is what kind of self is being formed by the way I move. That question matters because every rhythm teaches identity. If you live long enough inside constant urgency, you begin to believe urgency is your natural state. If you live long enough measuring worth by productivity, you begin to feel uneasy when nothing can be counted. If you live long enough collapsing after overextension, you begin to think peace only arrives through depletion. Over time, the cycle becomes familiar enough to feel like personality. And that is how people mistake imbalance for who they are. The ambition voice and the peace voice are not enemies. They become enemies only when the life has no higher listening place. Without that listening, ambition accuses peace of weakness, and peace accuses ambition of violence. One becomes the driver, the other becomes the brake, and the person experiences themselves as divided between expansion and survival. But when a deeper awareness is present, the question changes. It is no longer which voice wins. It becomes what rhythm allows both truth and humanity to remain intact. This is where the teaching becomes personal, because most people already know which voice has been louder in them. Some have been trained to chase movement because stillness feels like falling behind. Others have been trained to seek peace because ambition feels like pressure they cannot survive. Neither pattern is superior. Both can become distorted when isolated from the other. The driven person may need to learn that rest is not death. The withdrawn person may need to learn that movement is not betrayal. Both are being asked to stop confusing old fear with present guidance. And once that becomes clear, another layer begins to open. The real conflict may not be productivity versus presence at all. It may be a deeper question about whether you can build a life without using the building to escape yourself, and whether you can enter peace without using peace to avoid becoming visible. That is the place where ambition and stillness stop being opposites and begin revealing the same hidden threshold from different sides. The ambition voice becomes most powerful when it learns how to borrow sacred language. It stops saying, I am afraid to be ordinary, and starts saying, I am here for a mission. It stops saying, I do not know how to rest, and starts saying, there is too much work to do. It stops saying, I need proof that my existence matters, and starts saying, the world needs what I carry. Some of that may be true, but truth becomes dangerous when it is used to cover a wound that has never been allowed to speak honestly. This is why the driven person often feels divided in a very specific way. Their outer life may look like commitment, creativity, discipline, and momentum. But internally, there can be a quiet exhaustion that does not feel allowed to exist because exhaustion seems to threaten the identity that ambition has built. The person may not simply be tired from working. They may be tired from needing their work to constantly confirm that they are real, useful, necessary, or becoming someone worth being. The mechanism beneath this is subtle but powerful. When productivity becomes tied to worth, the nervous system begins treating rest as a loss of identity. Nothing dramatic has to happen. The person simply feels uneasy when the calendar opens, guilty when the body asks for space, and restless when there is no immediate task to justify the day. This is not always greed for achievement. Sometimes it is the fear that without motion, the self will lose definition. That is why peace can feel threatening even when it is deeply desired. Peace removes the external structure that ambition uses to organize the inner world. It asks the person to exist without being held together by urgency. It asks them to trust that worth remains present even when no visible proof is being produced. For someone whose identity has been reinforced through output, that can feel less like rest and more like disappearance. You may notice this in the strange discomfort that appears after completion. A project ends, a goal is met, a video is posted, a task is finished, and instead of satisfaction, there is a brief, hollow space. The ambition voice often fills that space quickly with another objective, because completion has exposed the silence underneath movement. The peace voice may try to enter there, but it can feel unfamiliar, almost too quiet to trust. So the system returns to motion. Not always because motion is needed, but because motion feels easier than being with what success did not resolve. This is one reason intense output cycles become addictive. They create rhythm, pressure, and immediate orientation. They make life feel purposeful because the next thing is always waiting. But if the cycle is never interrupted by true presence, purpose begins to resemble a treadmill with spiritual language painted on the side. The person may keep moving toward something, yet inwardly they are never arriving anywhere, because arrival would require stillness long enough to feel the life they are building. The peace voice does not always demand less work. Sometimes it demands a different relationship to work. It asks whether the act of building still carries joy or whether it has become a way to avoid emptiness. It asks whether discipline is serving the soul of the work or whether discipline has become a whip used against the body. It asks whether the mission is still alive in the present moment or whether the person is living under the pressure of an image they are afraid to stop feeding. This is where the teaching has to become careful. Some people do need more discipline, not less. Some people hide inside vague peace because movement exposes responsibility. Some people call avoidance softness, call inconsistency freedom, and call fear alignment. That is why this inner dialogue cannot be reduced to ambition bad, peace good. The deeper work is discernment between living motion and compulsive motion, between restorative stillness and avoidant stillness. Living motion has a different texture. It may be intense, but it does not erase the one moving. It may require sacrifice, but it does not require constant self abandonment. It may ask for discipline, but it does not need shame to function. Living motion leaves the person more connected to what matters, even when tired. Compulsive motion leaves the person more dependent on motion itself, because stopping threatens to reveal how disconnected they have become. Restorative stillness also has a different texture. It does not numb the person into absence. It returns sensitivity, attention, and clean contact with life. It may begin with fatigue, but over time it creates clarity. Avoidant stillness, by contrast, becomes foggy, heavy, and evasive. It does not restore the self so much as shelter the self from being asked to participate. Once you see this, the question becomes more precise. You do not ask whether you should build or rest. You ask what kind of building is happening and what kind of rest is being requested. You ask whether the ambition voice is moving from devotion or from panic. You ask whether the peace voice is inviting presence or protecting avoidance. That precision matters because without it, people often choose the wrong remedy or the wrong condition. The person who is burning out does not need more motivational pressure. They need to stop treating exhaustion as proof of seriousness. They need to understand that a life can be meaningful without becoming a furnace. They need to see that the body is not an obstacle to purpose, but the vessel through which purpose must move. If the vessel keeps being ignored, the work may continue for a while, but the signal slowly becomes distorted by strain. The person who is hiding from movement does not need endless permission to rest. They need a gentle but honest encounter with the fact that peace can become a hiding place when it never returns them to action. They need to understand that presence is not passive if it is real. Real presence eventually changes how you live, speak, choose, and create. If stillness never becomes clearer participation, it may not be peace at all. It may be fear wearing quiet clothing. This is why ambition and peace have to be brought into conversation rather than opposition. Ambition must learn to ask the body what pace allows the work to stay clean. Peace must learn to ask whether stillness is restoring life or delaying it. Ambition must stop using urgency to bypass inner emptiness. Peace must stop using softness to avoid responsibility. When both voices mature, they begin to serve one another rather than compete for control. In lived experience, this may look very ordinary. It may look like working deeply, then stopping before resentment enters the work. It may look like resting before collapse, not after. It may look like creating from a place of steadiness instead of proving. It may look like letting a quiet day count as part of the larger rhythm, not as a failure in the rhythm. These changes may seem small, but they begin rewriting the inner agreement that says a life only matters when it is visibly producing. There is also a hidden grief in this process. The driven person may have to grieve all the years they were praised for abandoning themselves. They may have to grieve the fact that people often rewarded their overextension because it produced value for others. They may have to grieve the identity of being the one who can always keep going. That grief is not weakness. It is the beginning of separating real devotion from the performance of invulnerability. And there is another grief on the side of peace. The person who has avoided movement may have to grieve the life that did not form because stillness became postponement. They may have to face the sadness of unused gifts, unspoken truth, delayed attempts, and possibilities left untouched because visibility felt unsafe. That grief is also not punishment. It is information returning after a long silence, showing where peace stopped being presence and became protection. When these griefs are allowed to exist, the inner dialogue becomes more human. Ambition stops pretending it has no wound. Peace stops pretending it has no fear. The person no longer has to choose between becoming and being, because they begin to understand that becoming without being becomes escape, and being without becoming can become stagnation. The real rhythm is not a compromise where each side gets half of the day. It is an intelligence that knows when movement is alive and when stillness is telling the truth. This is where the deeper implication begins to surface. The question is not whether you are productive enough, peaceful enough, ambition enough, or balanced enough. The question is whether your life is being organized by alignment or by compensation. Compensation can look successful for a long time. It It can build platforms, careers, reputations, identities, and even spiritual languages. But alignment has a different quality. It does not require you to disappear inside the very thing you came here to create. So you begin watching for the moments where ambition tightens and peace whispers beneath it. You begin watching for the moments where peace becomes foggy and ambition quietly knows something needs to move. You stop asking one voice to defeat the other. You ask what each one sees that the other forgets. And slowly, if you stay honest, a third rhythm starts to appear. Not constant output, not endless stillness, but a way of moving that does not require you to abandon yourself in order to prove that you are becoming. The third rhythm does not appear because ambition becomes quieter or peace becomes louder. It appears when both voices stop being treated as complete philosophies and start being heard as partial intelligences. Ambition sees the need to move, build, risk, and translate inner fire into visible form. Peace sees the need to return, soften, listen, and remember that no creation is worth the loss of the one creating it. When these voices mature, they do not cancel each other. They become a breathing pattern. Most people struggle here because they are trained to choose identities, not rhythms. They say, I am ambitious, or I am peaceful, I am driven, or I am slow, I am disciplined, or I am intuitive. These labels may feel useful at first because they offer clarity, but they can also trap a person inside one expression of themselves. A rhythm is different. A rhythm allows movement without turning movement into a prison, and stillness without turning stillness into a hiding place. You can feel the difference in the body before the mind can fully explain it. Compulsive ambition creates a forward lean that never relaxes. Even rest becomes another item on the schedule, another tool for better performance, another way to prepare for more doing. True rhythm feels different because it does not treat the body as a reluctant servant. It listens to the body as part of the intelligence of the path, not as an obstacle that must be managed into obedience. This is one of the deeper corrections many driven people have to face. They may have learned to respect ideas, visions, missions, timelines, systems, and results, but not the human vessel through which all of that has to move. They can treat exhaustion like a negotiable inconvenience and then wonder why the work slowly loses warmth. They can keep producing while the inner self becomes less available to the meaning of what is being produced. The result is not always failure. Sometimes the more dangerous result is success that quietly hollows the person carrying it. Peace enters there not as weakness, but as protection from spiritualized extraction. It asks whether the mission has become too willing to spend the body. It asks whether devotion is still devotional if it requires resentment, numbness, or chronic depletion. It asks whether what is being offered to others is still alive inside the one offering it. These questions do not destroy ambition. They purify it by forcing it to remain connected to the living source beneath the output. But peace also has to be purified, because peace can become sentimental when it is never tested by responsibility. A person can speak beautifully about presence while avoiding the uncomfortable labor of bringing a truth into form. They can call themselves surrendered when they are actually refusing the friction of commitment. They can protect their inner quiet so intensely that nothing meaningful is ever risked through it. Peace without participation can become a polished form of retreat. This is why the dialogue between ambition and peace must eventually become practical. It cannot remain an inspiring idea. It has to show up in how the person plans, rests, speaks, creates, responds, and stops. It has to affect the pace of the week, the honesty of the calendar, the willingness to pause before burnout, and the courage to move before avoidance hardens into identity. A teaching becomes real only when it changes the small decisions where the old pattern usually wins. For the ambitious person, the first practice is often learning to stop before collapse. This sounds simple, but it can feel deeply unnatural to someone who has used exhaustion as proof of sincerity. They may not trust rest unless they have earned it through depletion. They may not feel permission to stop until the body forces the matter. So the new practice is not merely resting more, it is resting before the emergency, which means learning to honor limits before pain becomes the only language the body has left. That one change reveals a great deal. It shows whether the person respects the body only when it breaks, or whether they can respect it while it is still quietly requesting care. It shows whether ambition can receive guidance from subtle signals or only from crisis. It shows whether the person is willing to let wisdom interrupt momentum before momentum becomes damage. This is where peace begins to teach ambition a new kind of timing. For the avoidant person, practice may move in the opposite direction. They may need to act before comfort is complete. They may need to speak before certainty feels perfect. They may need to create before the inner atmosphere becomes entirely calm. Peace has to learn that waiting for complete ease can become another way of never arriving. Sometimes the next honest movement is not born from confidence. It is born from enough clarity to begin while some fear is still present. That matters because both ambition and peace can misuse timing. Ambition misuses timing by saying now, 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 even when the self is fraying. Peace misuses timing by saying not yet, not yet, not yet, even when the door is open. One rushes past the body, the other may hide inside the body. One confuses urgency with devotion, the other may confuse comfort with alignment. A mature rhythm learns to ask a deeper question than when do I feel ready? It asks, what is the honest next movement that keeps me whole? This is where the inner counsel begins to become less like conflict and more like governance. Ambition is allowed to bring fire, but it does not get to burn the house down. Peace is allowed to bring stillness, but it does not get to turn the house into a locked room. The higher listening place receives both signals and asks what each one is protecting, what each one is avoiding, and what each one cannot see alone. That is how an internal life becomes less reactive. It stops letting the loudest voice define the whole truth. You may notice that this creates a different relationship to productivity itself. Productivity stops being the proof of worth and becomes one expression of alignment. Some days alignment will produce visible work. Other days alignment will produce repair, listening, grief, rest, or a quiet reorientation that does not look impressive from the outside. If worth is tied only to output, those quieter days feel wasted. But if worth is understood more deeply, those days become part of the unseen architecture that allows the visible work to remain clean. This is difficult in a world that rewards visible motion more than inner coherence. The world often claps when the ambition voice wins, especially when its winning produces something useful for others. It may not notice when the person behind the work is thinning. It may not ask whether the output was created from overflow or from self abandonment. That is why the driven person cannot rely only on external feedback to know whether their rhythm is healthy. Applause can become dangerous when it rewards the exact imbalance that the soul is trying to correct. Peace will often look less impressive to the outside world, especially in the beginning. It may look like slower production, fewer explanations, more silence, clearer boundaries, or a refusal to turn every insight into immediate content. But inwardly, it may be restoring the capacity to create without resentment. It may be returning the person to a deeper contact with what they actually mean. It may be allowing the work to become less frantic and more inhabited. Not all progress looks like acceleration. Some progress looks like recovering the self that acceleration had begun to outrun. At the same time, ambition may need to remain present so peace does not dissolve into vagueness. There is a kind of stillness that becomes fertile only because something in the person intends to return from it with clarity. There is a kind of rest that strengthens the next act because the person has not abandoned the call to participate. Ambition, when cleansed of panic, helps peace become embodied. It takes what was heard in silence and gives it form, rhythm, practice, and offering. So the mature relationship is not balance in the shallow sense. Balance often sounds like equal portions, as if half the day belongs to ambition and half belongs to peace. But living rhythm is more responsive than that. There are seasons where building must take more space, and seasons where restoration must take more space. The question is not whether both receive equal time. The Question is whether neither has been exiled, distorted, or forced to carry the whole meaning of life alone. That realization changes the way a person listens to inner conflict. When ambition rises, they no longer obey it automatically or shame it immediately. They ask whether its fire is clean. When peace rises, they no longer dismiss it as laziness or worship it as final truth. They ask whether its quiet is alive. This makes the inner life more spacious because the person is no longer trapped in a war between doing and being. They are learning to hear the quality of each movement. Eventually, the question becomes less about how much you can produce and more about what kind of presence your life is producing in you. Are you becoming clearer through the work or only more dependent on it? Are you becoming softer through rest or only more hidden inside it? Are you becoming more available to truth or more skilled at using either motion or stillness to avoid what truth requires? These are not questions for one dramatic movement. They are questions that return whenever the rhythm begins to tighten or fade. This is where the ambition voice and the peace voice begin revealing the same invitation. One asks you not to waste the fire that has been given. The other asks you not to sacrifice the altar that carries it. One asks you to bring something into form. The other asks you to remain present enough for that form to remain honest. Between them is a way of living that does not ask you to choose between expansion and rest, but teaches you to recognize when growth is alive, when stillness is true, and when the next movement must be chosen from a self that is no longer trying to prove its right to exist.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.